Good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. It was funny because this morning I had no idea, again, as I do many Thursday mornings, as I had no idea what I was going to talk about. In fact, I was talking to my husband, and we were sort of shooting around some stuff, and I was like, yeah, nothing's really sitting right. And then my daughter came upstairs from the basement, which was funny because I usually see her that early in the morning. And then she starts talking to me about this similar topic in a different way. And then I was like, okay, I guess obviously. Because then it was the third time, because yesterday I had a conversation with someone where this came up. And it, yeah, it's obviously important right now. So we talk about doing better, right? And I think I put that in the topic here. It's funny. Had to go back and read it. I'm like, what am I talking about? Because what keeps on coming into my mind, in terms of these conversations, is truly the sins. Forgiving the sins of the father, right? That we talk about all the time. We talk about what other generations have done. We make decisions based on what our ancestors have done. Oh, it's always been that way. It's something that we have to do this way. This is like the legacy of this family, right? This is the legacy of this ethnicity, of this race, of humanity, right? I'm pulling up this stuff on my phone because I don't know that I can see comments here. Here we go. And so the thing is that we're in this key space right now. Here we go. Now I can see. Now, of course, here we go again. I'm not being shown who's on with me, but that's why I had to pull up my phone. That's fine. So, and it's like, whose fault is it, right? Let's blame this. Good morning, Gloria. And we talk a lot about, look at what's going on now, right, with the Black Lives Matter. But that's just such a small piece of the bigger picture. And yet it's a very key clue for us to look inside. Now, through this past several months, it's funny, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday and said, have you ever seen the Hunger Games, or read it or whatever? And I said, yeah. And she said, yeah, like when they're in the Hunger Games, like every hour there's some other kind of thing that's dropped on them, right? Some other catastrophe or whatever for them to deal with, or some new situation. And she's like, isn't that what this year is? Are we in the middle of the Hunger Games? And I said, yeah, I think we are. But it's such a good thing. And the reason it's because it's very productive. It's very much pushing stuff into our face via a mirror that we can't look away from. And so every time we try to look away from the mirror that's presented to us, whatever that is, if we avoid it, instead of looking in the mirror, resolving it, moving on, then guess what? The next thing comes. It was funny because the person I was talking to didn't even know about the murder hornet thing that we had, that we had to deal with, right? And I said, yeah, so it's like one thing after the other after the other. And I don't feel like this is even close to being over, right? It's because it's showing us like what Sarah Stieg Avignoni and I spoke about on our Monday Ascended World podcast is looking under the rocks at what's in the cracks and crevices, and that's what we're doing right now. So one of the key points here has to do with how do we do it better, right? How do we get to a different point? Well, first of all, we have put such weight on history. We had we put, like, and it's not that it's bad. It's good to know. It's good to remember. It's also really important to remember, and I go through this debate with my daughter, who was a history major in college, is that history is very subjective to the individual who's telling the story, right? So everybody's got their own history. And the reason we do things are vastly different based on the perspective that's given, right? So some people do it because it's always been done this way. And give any kind of thing, right? So the conversation I was having with my daughter this morning was that somebody she knows, who is near and dear to her, is a parent of somebody very close to her. She said, I think she has like an eating disorder that was just never diagnosed because, she is obsessive about her weight. She's, she like is OCD about everything and talks constantly about it, and then looks at pictures from when she was a child and says, oh, I was this, and then I lost this weight, and then I did this, and it's all about weight, and what she looked like, and now she's become so tiny, and she is so really obsessive about, like, working out to a point that she actually hurt herself and had to go in for, an operation. And she goes, and so we got into the conversation about that. And I said, well, that all has to do with self-esteem. It always does. And believing that others, like can put value on you outside of yourself. And that only comes when you don't have value within yourself. Right. So this is a different perspective, because right now we're talking about all the Black Lives Matter. We've been talking about the virus stuff for the past, months, years, decades, whatever. Sickness, how we get sick, how we pass on sickness, those kind of things. These are all things that we're inheriting to accept as our reality. And so, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and it's like, okay, well, we want you to apologize for, what your great grandfather or great grandmother did, or whatever, just your race or your gender, or, I mean, we talk, like, look, we went to the Me Too movement, right? Okay, so now we're putting, then we were putting men to blame for everything, and the enslavement and minimization of women, even if the man that you're looking at or talking to has nothing to do with that. And so we do that the same thing. And so it's like, it's the Native Americans do it, like all different groups do this, right? And as I've said, there's been no real group in history that has never been enslaved or controlled in some way, shape, or form. And if it's not the color of their skin, it has to do with, where they come from, the country they love, like, 'cause then you have like one civilization taking over another, right? And these inherent grudges. I've never liked this kind of person because of this, because of what happened here. And so we live constantly in the past by doing that. As we are moving forward the goal is to shift into more full, higher consciousness. I guess that's a hard way to put, a challenging way to put that. Is, well, okay, so there's a couple of different things. Number one is I also look at it this way. I know I have lived many, many lifetimes. And so this is putting aside whether or not you believe, or religious beliefs, Gloria, exactly, like it doesn't have to be, the white man always says this, but it doesn't matter, because there's countries, there's belief systems, there's all kinds of things that we have chosen to push away, to project onto, to externalize and make, dirty or nasty or evil or whatever, and or wrong, right? So anyhow, as I see it and as I understand it, right, if we truly accept that we are the divine and that we are all creating we are embody ourselves the way we are to be facets, individual, unique, beautiful, magnificent facets of the divine, and yet all the same, coming from all the same place. Mask or no mask, Sarah says yes, exactly. But if we look at ourselves as all the divine and all different facets of the divine, think of the rainbow, right? Do you think the red judges the blue? Does the blue judge the purple? Does the purple judge the yellow? Do they all judge each other because they're a different part of the rainbow, or do they just exist as the rainbow, right? And that's the whole thing. And that's why I sort of love the whole LGBT community with the rainbow thing. It's like, and that's not just in the LGBT community, it's all of us. I mean, rainbows are beautiful because it shows the whole spectrum, and they make the prism of light, right? And so, and that actually includes the darkness and gives us depth. There were conversations I had, you want to talk about interesting interactions that I've had over my doing this professionally for more than a decade now. with, Lucifer and as the archangel, right? As whatever. And that's another facet of me, as it's another facet of you. To talk about this and the depth and how we created the darkness to create this depth and this rich experience, right? And I talked about darkness last week. Sarah and I talked about this as well. We have done like so much discussion about the darkness, and yet it is really a prominent thing that's very, very important because we created that as duality and externalization, right? To separate, to exclude. And so we have really immersed ourselves in that exclusion throughout this entire process. So we have also, so let's look at a couple of things that the ego has really glammed onto, right? We've glammed onto the romanticism of victimhood. We have romanticized martyrdom. And when I say romanticize, I mean like, we look at it as something to aspire to, right? Or that should be respected and revered, right? We talk about that. And so as we talk about that good morning, David. As we talk about that and we embrace it, we continue to perpetuate it, right? So if we romanticize victimhood and we romanticize lack and we romanticize, the grand journey of suffering and all that kind of stuff, and we perpetuate it because then at some level, the ego says, oh, well, that's what I have to do to be worthy, which is sort of like it's sort of, a paradox because it's like, okay, I have to be a victim to be worthy on my journey to overcome, right? Which then creates it again and then creates the victimhood and the lack and the suppression, the oppression. And so when we start looking at these things from the larger perspective, so I started saying, well, I know I've lived many lifetimes here. And I know I have lived a full gamut of experiences, part of one of the project managers of this amazing experiment that we did of this set of dimensions, right? One of the many. That's why we're here, all of us together. And so in that, if we take away time, because time is the perception of the mind, and say that it's all just exists simultaneously, and I say, okay, so first we put time in and say, okay, so I lived all these lifetimes. Say I lived 1,000 lifetimes. Say I lived 2,000 lifetimes. And in those, do you think I've never been the victim? Do you think, of course I've been the victim. I've also been the perpetrator. I've also been the murderer, the rapist, as well as the raped and the murdered, right? And I've also been the exalted and I've been the depraved. All of it. That's what we have desired to be in this experience, okay? So when we look at that and then we say, okay, well then let's pull out the partition of pretending that there's time and space and that all this was all not simultaneous. Well, what if it is all simultaneous and all of us here, right? That just goes to show you how all of us here are just the same me living different lifetimes. And when we do that, it's like, okay, so I can love every portion of me. I can love every experience and I can have gratitude for it. So here's the thing, I start with, we talk about the sins of the father, but that's just what we believe, like do to project out what we believe about ourselves. And if we say, okay, that generation did this, or these generations did this, or whatever, regardless of what this is, right? It's to say, okay, well, so I recognize it was part of the plan as the experience that we desired to have to explore this duality. B, not only do I forgive who I believe were my perpetrators, but I forgive myself because that's me. And I apologize to myself because that's me. Now it's interesting because this has come up a lot before even this all started, before even all this craziness started, whatever it was, March. I had a client come in and we were talking and like an exercise that I give as part of the Trinity the self-mastery class that I teach, and also just what my clients in general is look in the mirror and say, I love you. And she really balked at this. And this is a wonderful, wonderful, of course, all wonderful people. And I said, okay, how about you start with, and guidance was to have her start with, where did I just go? There we are. to start with, oh, I just start. Oh yeah, I just saw. Sorry, David. I just saw your comments because I didn't scroll down. I didn't realize it wasn't scrolling automatically. Anyway, so I said, well, how about we start with looking in the mirror and saying, I forgive you and I apologize. And that sort of made her like step. And so like between that session and the next one, she came back to me and she said, oh my gosh, she goes, I could just finally do that. It took me like 5 days. I couldn't even say it. She goes, and about the fifth day, I was able to say it. This is, I think, about a week and a half later. And she goes, and it feels so good. I forgive you and I apologize. And so when we talk about all these things going on, all the forgiveness needing to be done, victimhood, if you want to look at, the virus thing and talking about all the kinds of stuff about population control and all things like that, we are the perpetrators as well as the perpetrated. And so when we start taking that perspective, that is so important for us to forgive and apologize ourselves. And then after apologizing and forgiving ourselves, then it's for us to thank ourselves for the experience, because that is the experience we desired to have. That's a really big, good morning, Anne. It's a really big step, because we talk about coming into a place of unconditional love for ourselves. But to do that is to take these steps in the way, forgiving and apologizing, of knowing that we had things in our lives that, in our multiple lives, that we're not proud, that the ego isn't proud of or ashamed of or whatever. And so, what I've said to people who are activists about certain things, whether it's animal cruelty or slavery or whatever, is part of the reason we're usually triggered so deeply by something to be opposing it is that we probably did it in another lifetime and we are so ashamed of it that now we feel like we have to go to the other extreme. And so the first step is looking in the mirror and saying, I apologize, I forgive you, and thank you. And then I love you. Because those are the steps for us, and it is an inside job. When we get to that, then we just stop having to live in the past, because what happens is, so anybody here could tell you, like, right, we can all say in our lifetimes, there's always been something some kind of experience in our life that's happened that we play over and over and over in our head, and that we either are ashamed of, are angry about, feel like we were victimized, or that we were the perpetrator or did something wrong. So even in just this life, there's something that will play over and over, and it could have happened years and years ago. Well, that still controls us, and that still actually gets recreated if we continue to hold it in our reality today to say, this was awful and horrific and all that kind of stuff. And the biggest step is to get to a place of saying, okay, I forgive you. And here's the thing, and it's people sort of balk sometimes, especially those who've been or denied happened. Exactly. Yeah. Yes, David, I apologize. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. But yeah, or you denied happened. But the thing is, some people balk when I say that. And I've worked with a lot of people who've been abused in different ways, sexually abused, sexually assaulted, all that kind of stuff. And I say, okay, so the first thing to do is forgive yourself. And they're like, what? I'm like, forgive yourself, because there's a part of you that feels ashamed for going through what you went through, right? There's a part of you really deep down that you won't even acknowledge, that knowing that person who assaulted you is you, right? And so there's that forgiveness, there's the apology, there's the acceptance and the embracing, and the gratitude to say, okay, because then I always say, okay, so this happened in your life, right? And then we're just talking about in this life. Sometimes we go into, as we go on in working together, it's usually we get into other lifetimes too. But then it's like, okay, so what was that a catalyst for? What situation did that create for you that, at some level you believed you needed to have so that it would propel you someplace? And every time it happens, I've worked with some, there was a man I worked with once who was on his deathbed, pretty close, had a bad case of leukemia and was on his way out, and he wanted to come in. He wanted me to come in, and it was funny because he said to me, his wife had made the arrangements. And I actually went to his house and met with him. And I said, so, and he goes, well, I said, well, what is your purpose of doing this? Do you want to get better? Because you can get better. Or do you want to just resolve whatever it is that's in here? He goes, whatever is the most important that allows me to be at peace with myself. And I said, okay, so the first question is, how does this serve you? And so if you deny, yeah. So Gloria says, if you deny it happened, then you can't move forward. Exactly. Yes. So anyway, so I says, how does this serve you? And you know what? It only took him about maybe 5 seconds to come back, and he looked at me straight on and he goes, it served me because my family was falling apart. My kids are adults. They all went their own ways. My wife and I have been drifting apart. And this has brought the family back together. And I've had this period of time where we are very close and connected again. And I feel like they're going to stay connected whether or not I go. And I was just like, okay, so then can you change that? And there are other issues and things that he had or whatever that caused every disease we create for ourselves, whether we call it, due to environmental, toxins. That was my phone. Sorry. I just got so, I got there. Whether we blame it on environmental toxins or things that are not us, right? It's still something that we agreed to and decided to do at some level, right? And take on, or else we wouldn't take it on. And so, yeah, and so we worked together. And I'll tell you what, he was quite at peace when he did go. And I always tell people when I've worked with those who have what they consider terminal illnesses and things like that, it's not the success isn't whether the person dies or lives. Yes, and we can change anything. Anita Morjani, great story about that if you haven't. Dying to Be Me, great book, about how you can even at the last second decide to stay and change everything. We have that power. And so when we realize that, and it's like, okay, so this is my path, this is what I'm choosing. And yes, I forgive myself, I apologize, I forgive myself, and I thank myself for this. And now I can love myself and I can come to peace with it. And however I decide to go forward is my choice. So think about that. All of what I've said has nothing to do with anybody around us. It all has to do with what's inside ourselves. So if we choose to hold on to stuff, right? If you're a woman and you choose to hold on to the enslavement and minimization and whatever of women and wear it on your sleeve as an armband, that's one, that's fine, but it also perpetuates it the more we, continue to put blame and projection and whatever, right? Same thing with the whole black-white thing. Same thing with Native American stuff. Same thing with, what was the Jews in the Holocaust, right? Same thing with non-Christians and the Crusades. So many different things, right? So many different things we can point to in history. The British and the Americans, right? The Revolutionary War. You can just go on and on and on. So we can say, oh, well, I still can't stand these people because of what happened centuries ago to my ancestors. Well, then guess what? We continue to bring that energy forward, and we bring forward the romanticism of that victimhood so that we recreate it, because at some level we believe that it is a cool thing to have to experience. So then we can't judge ourselves for that either. Yes, the poor and the rich. Oh, those rich people. Oh, those poor people. Like, there's all that kind of stuff. And then what happens, as I've said, I think I even said this, I might have said this last week or recently in one of my podcasts about, the person I worked with who's extremely wealthy and felt guilty about it and, was just giving and felt like they couldn't give enough and felt like they were guilty and the bad person for being, wealthy. And I said, so do you give indiscriminately? Do you give by guidance? Does guidance tell you whether to give or not? Or, do you step back and ask? Or do you just do it because you feel a compulsion, because you believe you have to prove yourself to be a good person, even though you're wealthy, right? Which sounds sort of funny to many people, but that's the case for many. And she's like, well, no, I just give and give and give. And I'm like, well, but did you ever think that maybe, did you ever stop to ask your guidance? Because the guidance might say no. Because if you have somebody, again, taking out the partitions between time, and saying time doesn't exist, that person, or saying that, okay, let's look at a different life. I forgot where I was going there. But anyway, that person could be that in another life, abused their power through having a lot of wealth. And so if they hadn't resolved that, forgiven and apologized and thanked themselves for it, then no matter how much money you give them, it's just going to slip right through their fingers because they've now taken on a vow of poverty, right? Because if I'm wealthy, then I'm going to abuse my power and abuse other people, and I believe I need to be punished. So therefore I need to be deficient of money. And so that is what they've set their life up to be, because it is our power to create our reality, right? And so I'm like, okay, so if you just indiscriminately give, you can give people, it's just going to flush down the toilet if you're giving to somebody where it's not truly supporting their journey as they desire to have it. And if they don't first, and I told her it was important for her to forgive and apologize and thank herself for her experience. And I said, well, you should be teaching workshops on abundance, So there's all of this stuff. And so we hold all of this inside of us. And when we hold it all inside of us, we continue to perpetuate it and create it again and again and again. And then because we continue to romanticize overcoming the odds, overcoming the victimhood, overcoming the limitations, when it's like, okay, but we impose those limitations to begin with at some level of consciousness, and those who are imposing it on us are us too. And that is whether they're human or not human. Like, you want to talk about star beings or whatever. We're all the same divine consciousness. And when we adapt that, and that's my understanding, and we adapt that, then we start to see things as, okay, well, it's just me taking on a different role. It's me in the one-man show, right? One-woman show, whatever, of 25 million parts, and I'm playing all the parts. So then how can I love or hate one character more or less than another? Because I've created them in this play. And so it's and then how can I sit and say, oh, well, that play that I did, 500 million years ago, that was terrible. That was terrible. No, but it was part of what we were doing in this exploration, right? So it's for us to forgive and apologize and thank ourselves, because when we do that, that's when we can come into that unconditional self-love. That's when we can take a step forward with a breath of fresh air without all the weight of the past following us. And to say, okay, so if I do truly forgive and apologize and thank and love, then how do I create this in a different manner so that I don't have that deficiency and those limitations present in my reality? So that's a lot. It's a really huge step. And part of it has to do with this forgiving, apologizing, and thinking. The person I talked to where this first started yesterday had to do with ancestral stuff. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, we talk about the kind of parent we have to be, the kind of child we have to be, or, oh, I have to take on this sickness, right? Familial sicknesses that we've programmed into our DNA are things that we believe we had to have a certain experience through that sickness, illness, whatever you want to call it. And we can change that. And for those who are not adept in energy work and understanding, there's plenty of research that you can go and look at out there in quantum physics and elsewhere now on how our thoughts can literally change our DNA, because they do. It's our DNA that we create. It's the blueprint that we create to come in and live here and embody this part of our consciousness that's embodied here and have the experience that we want. In forgetfulness until we remember, which is what we're coming to now. So the biggest thing that trips us up is we get in our own way. And to get out of our own way is to do this inner work, the inside job. And I know I'm like, ugh, I roll my eyes. There's judgment there. Okay, forgive and apologize to myself. I'm repeating myself over and over and over and over again about the inner work, but this makes it so much easier, because when we all come to this place of peace and acceptance and forgiveness and apology and gratitude for ourselves, for us being the writers, the producers, the actors, and the audience, and to know that every step is perfect and that every next step is perfect, and we evolve as we go. If we could do that and let go of the weight of everything behind us, let go of the big bag of stuff, and come to that. And of course, in doing that with ourselves, we do it with each other. And in coming into apology and forgiveness and gratitude for ourselves, there's nothing we can do but do so for each other. And then that's when bias goes away and control goes away and, self-imposed limitations goes away. Like all those kind of things go away. And then we can be free and free our energy to move to the next thing. Now, the next conversation, although now we're 30 minutes, so it's time to sort of wrap it up. The next conversation to have is, it just fell out of my head. What was it? Yeah, I lost it. It'll come back probably when I get off. There's another step to this. I totally lost it. Oh well. It's the word things that have to come in with the understandings, and the words sort of like put in a lag sometimes. Then by the time I get to the words, it's like it's gone. So anyway, this is what there is for us to do this week. Do that simple exercise. Look in the mirror. Forgive yourself. Apologize to yourself. Forgive yourself and thank yourself. And then get to the I love you. I mean, do that as a process for you, because when we are free, that was the other conversation, is freeing ourselves up to evolve and create differently. And when we do that, we can only do that when we let go of the beliefs that we have to do things a certain way, that we have to do it around this, that we have to do it because of something, that it's just that we're guided to do it. And there is another part to that I've already lost again. But when we come to that place of gratitude and everything that you see judging other people, look inside yourself, look into the mirror, take a breath, and whether you're judging them, like, Sarah said, mask or no mask, right? Black or white or whatever, or woman or man, or human and star being, because we're all the same. It's just different levels, different parts of us, different parts of our consciousness. And when we come to that place of look at the beautiful darkness, duality, separation, the rainbow that we've created, that prism of light, then we get to a place, right? No shoulds, no regrets, all acceptance. Then we get to this place of saying, okay, from this wholeness now, what is the next step forward? And what do we make it look like now? What is our new creation? So baby steps. Have a great week. This is your home play for the week. And so we'll talk to you next time. This is Angela Coulter signing off on this week's Living the Shift. Have a great one.